Welcome back to my football pie series. This is the S version of the series. This is actually the 9th episode of this series. What I am doing is I am talking about little slices of my football pie and how I assess my teams and how I decide if my team is going to win or lose or what I think about the game. So this is the S. We are going through the word patterns. We are at the very end. This is the very last episode before the conclusion episode. So if you are starting here, I want to encourage you to go back and watch all 8 videos before this so that this video makes a lot more sense. If you are here because you're ready for the S and you've watched all my other videos, you are in the right place and I want to welcome you. So the S is for situational. And so at situational situations, I'm probably going to use that interchangeable. All of the things in this section are going to be another way that you can look at different things of the game that you can't control. Now, I know I had a similar section when I was in the equalizer and I was talking about the on-field things that you couldn't control. This is a little bit different where we're kind of taking a step back and kind of taking a different view. So the things that I have in this video are going to be situations that you're not going to be able to control, but that also impact a game. And so I will get into what that means and why I'm saying all of that and why on the other side of this video. As I mentioned before, all of these things are situational. The reason why they're situational is because they may or may not happen depending on the situation. The first thing I need to call out here is injuries. If you have everything all lined up and you're like, everything's going to be fine, nothing's going to happen, no one's going to get hurt, and then your starting linebacker goes down. Your starting linebacker goes down and it kind of changes things a little bit. So one thing to consider when you're assessing your football teams is how do injuries show up? How do injuries impact your team? Because if you do not think about injuries as a way that they impact your team, you're doing yourself a disservice. However, let's assume that a guy got injured and then he came back for the game. You have to kind of think to yourself, like, is he 100%? Is he still kind of injured? Is he going to be able to give us all he has? So something to consider there. The other thing is too, we all like to think our teams are 2 deep, 3 deep, whatever, right? We have backups on backups on backups on backups. But the truth is, the guy who won the starting job usually wins the starting job because the guy is better. So yes, when somebody comes out, you can say, oh, we're not going to lose much because we have this guy. If that guy was better than the first guy, 9 times out of 10, that guy would be the starter. I want to say, I know that that is not always true. I know that there's politics in football. I'm not going to act like that's not a thing. I'm just saying, if that guy was so much better, you would be able to see that. So something to consider is injuries. Is your team going through an injury bug? Do you have all your healthy running backs? Do you have all of your healthy offensive linemen? Like, how are injuries going to impact the game? It's very important when you're assessing your football team. The second thing I want to mention here is weather. So if you are playing a team, so if I think my team is a better team, but my team is going to play up north and we're not used to playing in cold weather, I have to factor in cold weather. So if I give, like I've said in other videos, if I give each thing that I'm talking about a point, either a negative point or a positive point, I have to look at weather as a point or not, right? Depending on what's happening. So I live in Texas. If a team is coming to play in Texas and it's 106 degrees in Texas, I have to assume that my Texas team is more prepared for the Texas weather than my team coming from Canada, right? Because it could be cooler. So just something to consider with the weather. The weather doesn't always play a factor when it comes to just 100 degrees or 40 degrees. Think about the rain. Think about the wind. If it is raining or if it is snowing, how does that impact a team? If it's snowing, it's going to impact a team's ability to throw the ball. If it's raining, it's going to impact a team's ability to throw the ball. So usually if it's me, if I'm assessing my team and my team isn't very good at running the ball, but the team we're going to play is very good at running the ball, and I know it's going to be raining, I'm probably going to give that team the advantage because they're better at running the football. So just something to consider as weather being one of those situational things where you need to pay attention to it. You can't always point to exactly the why, but you just know the weather is going to impact a game. The other thing is, obviously, it's just home field advantage. I said obviously as if you know it's on my list. But the other thing is just the location of the game. Do you have home field advantage? Are you going to have the crowd behind you? What does that look like? Is this home field advantage a big advantage? Some people would argue in college football, home field advantage is a bigger advantage than it is in professional football. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that or disagree with that. However, where the game is being played is very important. If you notice that you're a team that doesn't travel well and now you have to travel and you're going on the road and you're playing in a hostile environment, you need to know that. That is going to impact the game. Or the flip side of that, if you know this team might be better than you, however, this team is coming to play you in your home and you know the weather, they don't know the weather, and they have a couple of injuries and they can't convert on third down, reverting back to my other video, or they usually have a lot of penalties, you might have the advantage in that sense. So I always like to look at the things that I'm calling out as like a point system. And I'm going to be honest and say, when I started making videos about halfway through the season, I was starting to say, I feel like I'm kind of saying the same things over and over and over. How can I say these things to where they make more sense? And so in my mind, I started doing a point system. And so I started being like, okay, this is a positive. Okay, we have a better run game. 1 point for us. Okay, they have a better defense. Okay, 1 point for them. And I started kind of going through and being like, point here, point here, point here, point here. And that's how I started to decide certain things in my videos. So just a little pro tip. So that is how all of these things show up. Obviously, the hardest part about this situational stuff is it really depends on the situation. And that is why this section is kind of its own thing, because it really just depends on what happens. The last thing I'll say in this section that I think that we don't often talk about is, are you ready for the moment? Have you been challenged? Have you faced adversity? What does the adversity look like for you? Are you used to playing in these conditions? Are you used to playing in that environment? What does your team makeup look like? A good example for me, something that I'm thinking about when this came to mind and I was like figuring all this out was, and to just so we're clear, this is the last part that I had to figure out. I wasn't sure how I was going to equate these things or what I was going to do. However, when Texas played Arizona State in overtime in the college football playoffs, in my mind, I thought Texas was really prepared to play in that overtime game because we had just had an overtime game a few weeks before that against Georgia. And so to me, we were already in adversity and we were already in a situation and we had to rise to the occasion. And so I felt good about our chances in overtime. Now, I was pissed that we were in overtime, but I'm just saying it put it in perspective. I think another situation I could say about this is when Colorado went to go play Kansas. They weren't ready for the moment. Something happened in that moment and they weren't ready. Now, Coach Prime says they started feeling themselves, whatever. I personally think that that's on coaching. The coaches also have to rise to the occasion. I think a lot of times we always say the players didn't do it. The players didn't do it. I was calling the right thing. You didn't do it. We never think to say, though, if you called the right thing and your players didn't do that, okay, cool. However, did they do it at practice all week? Were the players able to do the things that you were calling at practice all week and you got to the game and thought, well, we haven't been able to do it all week. Let's just call it and let's see what happens. So something to kind of consider there is that sometimes the adversity that you've been through or that you haven't been through in a game can impact you because you don't know if you can rise to the occasion. You don't know if the moment's going to be too big because you've never experienced that moment. But once you experience the moment and once you go through the moment, you can kind of remember everything that you went through, how you got through it, what you need to do, what you need to change, and all of those different things. And you can hope for a better result. I think a good example of this could also be like when somebody gets injured and you notice how your team is responding to a certain, and you are seeing how your team is responding to a certain injury. I think that can help you. One example of this that is really sticking out to me that I think is actually a really good one when I think about it in context is, for Texas, we had issues with our tackles. Like our tackles kept getting hurt on both sides of the right tackle and left tackle. And so we didn't know who our tackles were going to be without those guys. However, as soon as one of those guys went down and Trevor Gooseby stepped in, we were all kind of like, we don't really know if he's going to be good enough for what he's going to do. And so we were all really anxious because we didn't know. So then what happened when he ended up stepping up and he ended up playing well, after that, we were like, okay, we at least know if something happens with our line, we have a tackle, right? Then in the Clemson game, we had a whole play where at one point we had like 3 offensive linemen that went out. Again, we didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to expect. However, we brought in different offensive linemen. It started to work itself out, and we were able to run the ball. The reason why I'm saying this is because when you look at some of these situations, they might not ever happen. Some of these situations might not come up in a game. You might never experience injuries on your side of the ball. You might not ever experience a weather issue. It could be 70 and perfect all day. You might never experience the impact of a home field advantage or things like that because you just might not ever have to deal with that. Obviously, the home field advantage thing is kind of weird because we'll kind of always experience that. But what I'm saying is you never know how these situations are going to affect people. And so that is why I have them here in this section. Now, it does get tricky when you're assessing your football team when it comes to the situational things because it's hard to really give points unless you know it's a thing. An example of that is going to be if you know you're going to be without your starting quarterback, okay, that's it. That's an injury situation. If you know you're going to be without your starting running back or your starting receiver, your starting tight end, or your starting safety or your starting linebacker, that is a situation. So you can kind of measure that. But if you don't know if you're going to be without somebody, you can't really measure that. The situation aspect of this is just more of like knowledge sharing and more of like to give context. It's kind of hard to measure these things unless the thing is actually happening with your team and you can measure it, then you measure it. So that's kind of how this plays out. This situational is similar to tendencies and is similar to the equalizer section. If you have not watched those 2 videos, I want to encourage you to watch those videos. If I'm smart enough and good enough, I will put each of those videos on either side of me so that you can go watch those videos. But the reason why is because all of those things were very tangible. The equalizers is tangible. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get turnovers. So that's a kind of a tangible thing. The other tendencies, I don't know if people are watching film. I don't know if they're going to be prepared. I don't know if we're going to break tendencies, but it's something that I'm going to keep an eye out on. So these 3 sections are sections where it's like, if these things happen, okay, then this, but if they don't happen, then you're okay. So just something to consider. It's kind of like a cause and effect. That's kind of how these sections are. It's like a cause section and effect section. If this happens, then this, but if it doesn't happen, you never have to think about it. So that's a kind of a good way to classify that. I will end the situational section. Hopefully this gives a little bit more context as to what I'm talking about when it comes to situational, a better way that you can look at football in a way where these things will impact the game, but if they don't happen, they won't necessarily impact the game. However, that doesn't mean that they are not added into things when you're assessing your football team. Each of these 4 things, in my opinion, are very important, but just remember, they don't always happen in every football team. But when they happen and when they pop up, you have to consider them when you're trying to assess your football team's ability to win or if they're going to lose a football game, unfortunately. So this concludes my all patterns, all the things I said in patterns. This is the very last. This is the S. If you can spell patterns, P-A-T-T-E-R-N-S. This is the S. So we are at the end. I will have a conclusion video to kind of tie everything together that we'll release after this video, but I hope that me sharing all of this so far has given you at least something to better understand, at least something to follow along with, at least something where you can identify and go, okay, what is this? Where can I place this? Or if you're new to learning football, you can kind of go, okay, how do I even understand my team? Everybody's saying we have the best running backs, we have the best coaches, we have the best defense, we have the best this, we have the best stadiums, the best this. What does that mean in context of football? How am I looking at this team? Like, what does this football team look like? How do we assess these different things? I know by the time that this releases, this will also be in the off season. And so it's kind of hard. It's going to kind of be hard to really make sense of some of these things. However, you can go do research. You can go research your teams. You can go watch your team play old games this year. You can go look at the stats from your teams. You can use a lot of these different touch points to then go back and look at your teams and really make sense of, Was my team good at third down conversion rates? Was my team good at turnovers? Was my team good at managing the clock? Did my team run the ball? Did my team, right? You can kind of go back and you can assess all these things because the season has happened. Because as the season comes back and the spring ball is going to start happening, you can start to watch the spring game with a different set of eyes. You can start to look at your team with a different set of eyes. And when the season starts, you can also start to look at your team with a different set of eyes. I will end this video here. Like I said before, there will be a summary or a conclusion or a final video to kind of tie all of this together. But I hope that you have enjoyed the series and I hope that it has helped you. And I can't wait to see you in my next video when I am talking about all the things that I talked about and hopefully bringing it all together to make a little bit more sense. If you haven't already, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to add a comment, and maybe most importantly, don't forget to turn on those notification bells so you will know when the new video releases because it will officially be episode 10 in my series. I'll see you in my next video.